of the day. One plan. He says, McClellan gets elected, the Emancipation Proclamation is going out the window. Yeah. You guys need to help me spirit as many slaves as possible across Union lines, because after March 4th, 1865, I will be no help to you. Thankfully, he gets that great telegram from Sherman in September. Atlanta is ours and fairly won. And, of course, everybody's like, oh, I'm not against the war. I'm for the war. The war's going great. I'm for it.
Boy, we haven't changed it all.
Yeah.
Jeez.
That's right.
We are just little worms. So,
but some of us are glowworms, to quote Winston Churchill.
All right, so there he is, but he goes back to meet and meet with Lincoln again later. And he's kept away from Lincoln.
Yeah, after the second inaugural address, Douglas was there, he sees it, and he figures, hey, there's a reception, there's no reason why I, an American citizen, can't see this elected president. He goes to the door, and they say, no colored people are allowed. And he says, there's no way that that order emanated from Mr. Lincoln. And so they say, okay, fine, come with me. So the two security guys bring Douglas in, and then escort him out a window. They had planks on this window there were so many people at the reception, they needed to find a way for them to get out. And he gets escorted out the window.
Wouldn't that be great if we could put those planks back up and we could escort people out the window?
So he walks the plank, and he finally gets word back to Lincoln. Lincoln sends for him. He comes across this great ballroom, the East Room, and he says, there's my friend, Mr. Douglas. Douglas comes to him, and Lincoln says to him, there's no man in this country whose opinion I value more. What did you think of my speech? And he said, Mr. Lincoln, that was a sacred effort. And that was the last time he saw him alive.
All right, I want to, I'm going to take a break, and then when I come back, I want to go back to the Revolutionary time, because African Americans played a critical role, And there is one thing that drives me out of my mind. I've heard presidents say it. And it is such a misjustice to our founders, such a miscast, and it cannot be anything other than intentional by people who are intelligent. But then again, I've seen how history has been distorted and changed. You may not even know the truth. Maybe I should give them the benefit of the doubt. They don't know the truth either. It is, I am only 3/5 of a man, and don't tell me about the founders. Let's correct that history. It is crucial to understanding, and it restores the founders and who they were. Back in a minute. You are going to learn more about our founders and the role that African Americans played in the founding of this country in the next 15 minutes than you probably have learned your entire life. Back with me is David Barton, founder and president of Wall Builders, and Lucas Morrell. He is a professor at Washington and Lee University in Virginia. I want to go back to Frederick Douglass here, because Frederick Douglass actually was very upset at our founders because he said, I'm not just 3/5 of a human being, I'm a full human being. This is an argument that is used even today that Frederick Douglass corrected.
Yes.
Tell me the story.
What happened was, after he escaped in 1838, he ended up in New York. In New York, he gets discipled by a lot of anti-slavery folks, and that's the Lysander Spooners and Garrett Smith and William Lloyd Garrison, etc. And Massachusetts Society hears him do his testimony, and they said, oh man, you got to speak for us. Well, in the meantime, they're saying, you know, you need to overthrow the Constitution, because the Constitution is a slavery document. The founders gave us slavery in the document, and there's all these clauses of slavery. And he believed that. But bless his heart, when the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society said, we want to pay you to go on the road full time, he said, okay, I got to make sure I know this stuff. So he sat down and read the Constitution for himself, not just what the guys had taught him. He read it himself, and he read the documents surrounding it, the debates going around it. And he comes out with this epiphany and says, this is a great anti-slavery document. And he says, every clause in it. You go, whoa, time out. How can the 3/5 clause be an anti-slavery clause? Real easy. He read the convention notes. What happened was, you had all these anti-slavery founding fathers. You had, for example, James Wilson. You had Elbridge Sherry. Gerry, you had Luther Martin,
Ben Franklin.
all these guys, all these anti-slavery guys. And you had 3 hardcore southern states that were pro-slavery. There's Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina. And so the Constitution says every 30,000 inhabitants you have, you get a representative to the House of Representatives. And in South Carolina and Georgia, there's more blacks than there are whites, and they're slaves. And they said, great, every 30,000 slaves we've got, we'll get another member of Congress. Guys up north said, no, 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 we're not doing that. If you want to count them, you free them. Every free person you have, you can get 30,000. You can have, and they said, no, no, we're going to count this, or we're not going to be part of these United States. So this debate goes back and forth. And what's really funny is the guys in the South said, you know, blacks are property. I love.
They're not people.
They're not people,
but they want to count them as people.
And see, the guys in the North said, no, every black is equal to a white. We're all created equal. You get 30,000 free blacks. You get a member of Congress, and that was the incentive to free blacks. It was you get to count them for Congress. So the guys up north started having fun with the guys down south. They said, you know, you guys say that blacks are property, and Elbridge Gerry did this, and Luther Martin did it out of Maryland. They said, okay, here's what we're going to do up north: is you're counting 30,000 pieces of property to get a member of Congress. We're going to count 30,000 chairs and horses and cows. We'll count our property. Every 30,000 pieces of property we get an anti-slavery member to Congress. So they went back and forth on this thing, and what they finally ended up was the 3/5 clause that says, okay, we will count 3/5 of the slave population, not individuals, which meant you now had to have 50,000 before you could get a pro-slavery rep to Congress. The 3/5 clause cut the slavery representation in Congress in half. And when Frederick Douglass read that, he said, the 3/5 clause, that has nothing to do with the worth. That has to do with the representation. It makes it harder to get a pro-slavery representative in Congress. The Constitution's an anti-slavery document. And it was.
It was.
And
That's why they
Frederick
changed.
Douglass who points that out.
The original document for the Declaration of Independence was life, liberty, and property.
And property. That's right.
The reason being, they changed it. They changed it to pursuit of happiness because they didn't want the South to say, ah, ha, ha,
that's right. The South.
You've got chairs, we've got people. By the way, all of these people here, most people, these pictures, most people cannot identify them, but they all played a role in the founding of our nation, or the refounding of our nation. These people are now in the textbooks because of Texas, because of what happened. These people, they fought to put these people in. Why would the left fight to put these people in?
Let me go back to the picture we had earlier of the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Okay.
So if you take that picture of the Battle of Bunker Hill, and this is a painting that was done in 1817, and the guy who did this, John Trumbull, did this painting. John Trumbull was at the Battle of Bunker Hill. He's the guy who drew the maps for Washington, what went on. Over here on the right, we have Peter Salem. Now, he had 14 military commendations that day. He is the hero. They brought him in front of George Washington to get special honors from the commander-in-chief.
He's the guy standing behind the white guy with the sword.
That's right. Now, the white guy with the sword is Thomas Grosvenor. So you have Thomas Grosvenor and you have Peter Salem, black and white, fighting side by side. But Peter is definitely the hero that day. 1817, this painting is done, and all the way up until the 1980s, we knew that that was Peter Salem, the hero of Bunker Hill. 1980s, the professors got together and said, oh, no, that's not Peter Salem. We think that that's Grosvenor's slave is who that is. It's not Peter Salem.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, in the 80s, they changed that from Peter Salem to Grosvenor's slave, Asaba. And that's what they say, oh, no, it's not Peter, it's Asaba, Grosvenor, it's his slave. How come the guy who painted it and the guy who was there and the guy who saw it and painted what he saw had him as Peter Salem, and now we've all convinced, oh, no, it's a slave? Because we're into this thing of the founders have got to be evil. We got to make every effort we can to make them. We got to make victims and everything. These guys weren't victims. They were courageous Americans who won the battle, and we can't afford to say that. That'd make America look good.
When did America have the first Speaker of the House?
1789.
Wow. Details next.